It is 7:03 Eastern Time in New York City. Welcome. Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to yet another installment of Say It Ain't Contagious. As in the past, I am joined by my fabulous co-panelists, Adrian Burgos, Craig Calcaterra, Steve Goldman, Lincoln Mitchell, and Tova Wang. We are a group of baseball enthusiasts, writers, scholars, critics, fans, who have been having a series of conversations about baseball in the midst of this COVID crisis, in the midst of a political crisis, in the midst of transformations in the game itself. This is our fifth installment, and we're really pleased to have you here with us again. If you're a repeat visitor, thank you for coming back. If you're new, welcome. We've called this iteration the election special because we want to offer a slightly different iteration of what we think is unique about this group of commentators, right? Historians, baseball writers, political scientists, analysts, which we think is our ability to combine a thoughtful and incisive discussion of baseball with an equal thoughtful and perceptive analysis of politics and the politics of our time in a form that we think is unlike any other form out there right now. You certainly will not see this sort of commentary in mainstream media circles or even in other podcasts, right? I think. And so we're going to do what we've done in the past. We're going to have a series of questions, and I will moderate. Frank Guridy, I'm the moderator. We'll have 2 rounds of questions this time. And then we'll have a series of follow-ups, which I will pose to the panelists, and then we will open it up to everyone to engage through the chat or through the Q&A. We can unmute you if you want to deliver your question orally. If you want to just put it in the chat, you can do that as well. We will follow the chat and try to catch any sort of comments and contributions that are coming in that way. Okay. So I'm asking the panelists to speak for, not too long in response to my questions, so we have enough time to engage in discussion. We're going to start with let's talk by talking some baseball, right? We're going to start by talking about the World Series, Game 5. All of you probably know, just finished last night. The Dodgers are up 3-2 on the verge of winning their first World Series since 1988, as Bill Plaschke likes to tell the world in his LA Times columns. Speaking for the Los Angeles Dodger fan, as he tries to do. Craig Calcaterra is one of his fans. That's a joke. At any rate, so I'd love to hear from the panelists about what you think of the World Series thus far, before we get into our discussion of the politics of that are approaching upon us every single day here as we approach the election.
Thankfully, it's a webinar. Good. I can just listen to it.
Although we hear you. At any rate, perhaps you have something to say about the head-scratching strategies of Dave Roberts. I certainly do, although I won't today. Or the ubiquity of the home runs that we see in every single game. These games are starting to look like steroid era games to me in some ways. Perhaps you're compelled by the historic performances of Corey Seager or Randy Arozarena. I certainly am. Clayton Kershaw winning 2 games in this series. He had a gutsy performance last night. Manuel Margot's gutsy attempt to steal home. You don't have to comment on any of those matters, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about what we've seen so far in this World Series. And I will start with Adrian.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks everyone for joining us on the conversation. It's just an interesting World Series because of all the unique aspects to it. Neither team is really a home team. They're playing in Texas, of all places. When was the last time the Texas Rangers were in the World Series? It's been a while. But anyway, their home park gets to be a host. I've been fascinated by Randy Arozarena's performance throughout. Here's a guy, Cuban defector, who really committed himself this year to making a difference. And the trade that the Rays made and getting him from St. Louis has turned out into one of the best transactions that organization has ever made. I don't think it's going to be the equivalent of the Cardinals getting Lou Brock from the Cubs, but it might end up in a ring, and that'd be fascinating enough. The other thing that really gets me about this World Series is Kenley Jensen's performance, and part of it is I admire Kenley as a person. He was a Mariano Rivera Award winner. He is someone who's modeled his career on trying to be someone like Roberto Clemente. He's talked about doing good in his native land, and he's struggling. And it's just the perfect storm of 2020 and what happened to him when he blew the save. And it was kind of very much a Mariano Rivera type blown save. None of the balls were really hit hard, and yet They found their places, and that's the kind of the beauty of baseball. They found their places, and the Rays won that game. We're going to see in Game 6 and Game 7, I think there will be Game 7, that whether or not Kenley gets a chance to redeem himself. So those are the two kind of storylines that continues to fascinate me. I just wish the announcers would stop talking about all these record-setting performances. We have extra rounds. You know, it's like, oh, wow, he passed Bernie Williams for most home runs, and he passed. It's like, my goodness, they've almost played as many playoff games as they have in the regular season in one off season. So.
Thank you, Adrian. Yes, Arosaneda is a compelling story for a variety of reasons, and Jansen's. It's going to be interesting to see if Jansen pitches again in a game-saving situation. And I agree with you about your comments about the record-setting performances that we're seeing. What was it? Seager broke Duke Snyder's home run record or something. Duke Snyder had played in the league championship series. All he did was play in World Series. So yeah. I mean, that sort of boosterism and mindless comments on baseball history persist, among many other things that Buck and Smoltz say every single night, particularly when they were going on and on about how wonderful the ballpark is there at Global Life in Arlington. That's one of my critiques. Awesome. Okay, so we'll pick up some of those threads. Arosaneda as this iteration of longstanding Cuban performance in Major League Baseball is a really interesting story in a variety of ways, I think. So perhaps we could circle back to that. I'd like to go to Craig.
Well, first, I will be a completely unbiased member of the national media when I talk to you all today. I actually am not a Dodgers fan. I'm a Braves fan. Dodgers are sort of a secondary rooting interest, and I have this because I own a hat and I'm bald and I own lots of hats. I actually have a Giants hat too, Lincoln, just to let you know. I have an A's hat, Frank. I don't have a Yankees cap. I won't wear one of those. But anyway, first of all, a couple of things from what Adrian said. The Rangers, 2011, were in the World Series the last time, and on this night, exactly in 2011, they had the rain out. There was the rain out between games 5 and 6 that pushed Game 6 one more night, and then that Game 6 was the very famous Nelson Cruz. Some people call it the David Freese game. Call it what you want, but I think we all remember watching all of that. That was a pretty fascinating World Series. This one, not quite up to that level for me. And I was telling the other panelists before we got started, I don't know what to think about this World Series so far. There are things I absolutely have loved about it. There are things I don't really like very much about it. Speaking about Buck and Smoltz, as we can't talk about the World Series anymore without talking about broadcasters. The one thing that I think has done Joe Buck a very good service in this World Series is that there are no fans there. And I don't mean that as a huge swipe at Buck. One of the biggest things he's ever had a problem with, I think, is matching the intensity of the crowd, which he's never going to match the intensity of a World Series crowd because this is not his game. He would actually be a great regular season baseball commentator because he's pretty low and mellow the whole time. And so when moments have happened and he ratchets it up a little bit and there's no crowd to drown him out, he actually meets the moment pretty well, I think, in a reasonable way. So I've actually enjoyed Buck to the extent someone can enjoy Buck. Smoltz, as a Braves fan, God love him, but he's not a very good commentator, except for when he talks about very narrow pitching things. Overall, though, I can't get away from the narrative of the series. I criticize narratives all the time, but I can't get away from the Dodgers haven't won it for 32 years. Dave Roberts keeps screwing up, and is he going to screw up again? Well, yes, he screwed up some, but he's also improved a little bit. The one thing that he's always done in the past, and is leaving Clayton Kershaw in too long for that back-breaking home run in the postseason. How many have there been? 4 or 5? It seems like a million of them. His quick hook with Kershaw in Game 1 and in Game 5, which was criticized in real time by everyone, myself included, ended up being the right call. You don't know what's going to happen if you leave him in longer, but nothing bad happens, so it was okay. Is our David Roberts learning? Yes, he is learning a little bit. So that's been good. I have had a hard time, though, just getting into the rhythm of this series. And maybe it's because Game 4 was so screwed up with such a random outcome at the end. Maybe it's because Game 3 was so anticlimactic and kind of boring, frankly, with the Dodgers' easy win on Friday. But I don't feel a build. And now I think we maybe could get a build, and I'm actually hoping for it. My Dodgers hat notwithstanding, I want the alternating thing to continue. I want the Rays to win Game 6, and I want Game 7 to just be a barn burner, because I think that would really help the season get to a point that we just haven't had all year, which is feeling good and feeling right. I said in the last seminar we had a couple of weeks ago that I felt like there's been an arc to this season, and I still believe that, but it's not a satisfying arc. It's just a recognizable arc. If we can get the alternating thing continue, if we can get a Game 6 Rays win and a huge Game 7 that is memorable, I'll almost say that this season was worth having.
I too am rooting for a Game 7. I think we're going to get one. I mean,
After all this crap we've gone through this year, we deserve
give us a
it.
Game 7. It's true, absolutely. I would love to see. So who's pitching Game 7 for the 6 for the Dodgers? It's not.
It's Tony Gonsolin and
Okay.
probably a
That's a
cast
good
of his
idea.
many friends.
Yes,
So Roberts will have that under control.
certainly.
Roberts
Yes,
has promised that Gonsolin will actually get some innings this time.
he'll pitch one inning or 2 innings. Yes. It won't
Devin
be-
Garcia will be starting for the Dodgers.
yeah, So I mean, Craig, I think your comments. I'm sure a number of us feel that way. The games aren't uninteresting, but it still doesn't feel right in a lot of ways. I mean, the fact that it's in Texas bothers me, for a variety of reasons.
Oh, the one
perpetually.
point,
Yeah.
the one thing that
Go.
you said about them keep saying they keep talking up Globe Life Park,
Yeah.
or Field or whatever it's called. You can tell that's a mandate from
Oh, of course,
Rob
yeah, no,
Manfred.
yeah, absolutely.
It's a horrible park. I mean,
Yeah.
we haven't been in it, so you don't know what it's like as a fan, but there's nothing to recommend it. It's like playing in a giant bingo hall or something. The thing just looks bad for TV. It doesn't look like it plays very fair in a lot of ways. I don't mean for hitters or for pitchers, but like the bounces are weird. They're not used to the turf yet. It's not just a fan thing. I think the place looks like a convention hall.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, whatever. I'm big on stadium architecture. These facilities that are supposed to look unique and different, they all look the same now. They look as similar as the cookie cutter stadiums did in the 1960s and 70s, in my view. Steve, give us your take on what's happening so far in these first 5 games.
Well, just to pick up from what Craig said, the other thing about that park is it's weirdly dark. It's like, it looks like a mall or something that you expect senior citizens to be power walking along the warning track. It's very strange. It's like somebody turned off half the lights so everyone would know to go home. And I just keep waiting for them to turn on the rest of the lights. As for the World Series itself and the postseason in general, it really is kind of amazing how much Arozarena has changed the complexion of it, because without him, the Rays don't really have a big hitter in their lineup. They have a lot of interchangeable parts, and it changes the whole complexion of the team, as if they added this is an inapt comparison, but a Ralph Kiner or a Babe Ruth or somebody just dropped him in the middle of the lineup. And if you think that that's an exaggeration, one of the things that has just really fascinated me this postseason, on the basis of the very simple math that I'm capable of doing, is that between the regular season and the postseason, he's homered about once every 8 at-bats. So if we were to have a full season next year, which is unfortunately not a definite thing, and say he had 550 at-bats, well, simple division tells us that is a pace for 64 or 65 home runs, i.e. Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, 1998 territory. And I keep saying, but that can't be real, right? That's not going to be his actual pace. And the story of it, the backstory that he got COVID, and somehow, as opposed to being debilitated by it, and instead of doing what the rest of us would do if we were forced to sequester on that basis, and actually in some ways many of us have been, whether we've been unfortunate enough to get it or fortunate enough not to get it, we have sequestered on that basis because there's nowhere to go, and we dial up TV series on and binge watch them and sit on the couch and don't get enough exercise and so on. But he apparently decided to remake his body and do a ton of sit-ups and a ton of push-ups, and it's like, you can decide to be better, which is not something that we would normally think about baseball in terms of just unlocking video game style. You have unlocked the 80 power upgrade, champion of the game, and now he's homering every 8 times up. I will say that I did enjoy, as foolhardy as it was, the Manny Margot steal of home, because it does allow a little variation into what can be kind of an airless game right now. And we've talked about this before. I think all of us have at some point, that the predominance of home runs and strikeouts, and how there's much less actual play happening in baseball. It's much more of a static game. Even the play that the Dodgers blew to lose game 4, it was game 4, right? With the Dodgers clanking like 3 different things on the same play, and Arozarena falling down and everything. That was more action than we typically see right now. It was not just a guy jogging around the bases after hitting the ball over a building. And we have had some of that, but a little bit else mixed into it. The one aspect, and Frank, you alluded to this before, that I wish we didn't have was the bullpenning aspect. And after the Tony Gonsolin game, people attempted to recast that as kind of an act of brilliance on Dave Roberts' part, that he was kind of laying up and setting up Urias for the subsequent games and so on. I think he just messed that up. I think he could have let Gonsolin go long in the first place and not stretched his bullpen. And of course, we'll never know what Gonsolin would have done had he remained in there, or if Derek May had been given a start instead of being shoehorned in again and again into these relief roles, whether the situation calls for it or not. He's anxious. And I might have said this last time, but one of my favorite Casey Stengel lines was something to the effect of that as a manager, you plan and you drill and you train, and then you have to trust the outcome to morons like these. And that's a problem for a lot of managers in the postseason. I used to call, and I've seen other people pick up on this, and I do want to take credit for it. I was the one who called Joe Girardi Coffee Joe, because in the postseason, he became a much more anxious, much more aggressive manager with pitching changes and bunting and things that he would not do in the normal run of 162 games. And my sense is he just couldn't abide letting the outcome happen in the way that he would during the regular season. We're seeing that with Dave Roberts. And the addition of all these relief pitchers, because we have more than usual, just means that the temptation to use them is there. This is kind of embarrassing, but I was thinking back to how when I was a kid, my mother did not typically bake. She was not a baking mom. She was occasionally a knitting mom, but mostly she was a professional mom. But one day when I was, 10, there was a can of like Betty Crocker pre-made frosting in the fridge. And I was never allowed things like that. And so I thought, well, I'll just sneak a spoon out because I really like icing on cake. And then an hour would go by and I would sneak back and take another spoon. And it's kind of disgusting, but the fact that it was there led me into a kind of temptation that I would not have experienced had she not purchased it in the first place. And I feel that that is Dave Roberts and his bullpenning and his many relievers.
Yeah, bullpenning as a verb, is an interesting introduction to the baseball lexicon. And I too love the Margot attempt to steal of home, although in the end it probably cost the Rays the game. It certainly changed the momentum of that inning as Kershaw was on the ropes. Yeah, I think there's all sorts of storylines that we're seeing here, and hopefully we'll see some more here in the next few games. Tova, give us your take, please.
Well, I can't top that analogy. I was going to use raw cookie dough in my remarks because that's off. So I'm surprised listening to all you guys. You are much more positive than I thought you were going to be. And so I don't have to quite as much find myself in the incredibly awkward and uncomfortable position I have found myself of being the one who is the most joyful and optimistic. But I have also sort of taken on the role of what I am, which is, sort of an unabashed fan. And I am going to just embrace that and lean into that and say that I have really been enjoying the World Series a lot. I enjoyed the League Championship Series too, which, maybe people didn't expect, but the stress over the Astros possibly winning and that just being like the pinnacle of 2020 probably is what grabbed a lot of my attention. And then that not happening was, I had to, to read the larger meaning into that too. But, if you did love the game on Saturday night and how that ended and you call yourself a baseball fan and you don't have a pulse, we watched that over and over again. I mean, literally like not like almost against my will, because it just seemed like, well, maybe at least in my little world, that replay was everywhere. And I loved hearing it being broken down and whose fault it was and like the whole chain of events and all that kind of stuff. So that was great. And like everyone, I've enjoyed watching Mookie Betts. I can't believe his name hasn't come up yet, but he's a lot of fun. Let's have the debate with Mike Trout, who I literally have never seen play, I don't think. But that's where I am. I've enjoyed that I don't know the Tampa Bay players and, never gave a shit about them before last week. And then you have a guy like a Rosarena who comes in there and lights up the place. So enjoying, getting to know him, seeing that Clayton Kershaw, if managed the right way, does not have to, completely make a fool of himself in a postseason game. Justin Turner's beard is awful. And I kind of can't look away from that too. I wanted to be sure to mention that. But just, thinking about all these things about, Dave Roberts managing, Kevin Cash's managing, which I haven't heard criticized, which I think you could, to be thinking about, whether it makes sense to have 4 outfielders in such and such a situation, or the quick hook on pitchers. I'm not sure I even agree on the Kershaw thing, even though it happened to work out. The using starters as relievers business, which has annoyed me, but okay. And the whole thing about home runs dominating the game, all of that. We've talked about this and in different ways and shapes and forms. I did take refuge in baseball over the last couple of weeks. I really did. And, I know that there are problems with it, and that there are all sorts of philosophical things that we have talked about and will talk about. But, these players are having so much fun, you can't watch them and not feel the joy that they're having in the game. And, it just made me really feel like, what, these fuckers are not going to take that away from me. And I'm sorry, people, for language, but, like, seriously, like, I'm going to always have that joy, and I'm not going to let, all of everything else, even if they're not playing the game. And we were going to have a special session on baseball under authoritarianism, but we can always, we can all get together. I can read books, and
that may be November, December. We'll do that.
Yeah, exactly. So, but hopefully we can all look forward to hanging out no matter what. So, and actually give it credit. I don't know how this happened. Baseball has not had a positive test in 2 months, which I really don't know how they pulled that off, especially looking at what's going on in football. And just one last point. So actually 2 last points. One thing is, don't be sad, because actually baseball does not end next week or this week. The KBO postseason starts next week. And yes, I will be watching. And then I just want to, because I can't go off on a high note. I do want to bring up our pal, Rob Manfred, for a second, who of course is saying, he's going to make all the changes permanent. The one thing that really puts my hair on fire, and it's like, even like stuff like the DH, I actually don't care that much about anymore. But it's talking about banning the shift and doing stuff to ban the shift is actually even worse to me than some of the other things that he's talking about. Because that just, it's like, oh, someone comes up with a clever new way to, play the game and strategize, and he's gonna get rid of it by so we can talk about that some other time. But I just wanted to complain about something at least once.
So that you could just remind us why you're in this group. Your ability to complain is also there. I am actually astonished that you don't know any of the players on the franchise formerly known as the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. After all, they're the team that took out your Yankees. And so I suspect you might have paid attention to some of those players.
I was trying to be polite about that. I learned those players' names.
Yeah, well, no, I'm coming for you next, Lincoln. Don't worry. Yes, the beards and the fashion. Again, it's just so lacking in so many. The aesthetics of I don't like. Although I'm wondering why Margot or Diaz wears a red wristband, which I think is interesting. The Rays player. I think I'm with you. I'm watching more World Series this year than I have in quite some time. Maybe because I'm doing this with you folks, but I think it's also because I'm compelled by some of what we're seeing here, even as I don't like a lot of what we're seeing. Okay, Lincoln. So I see some Dodger fans in this group.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that this is going to be hard for you if the Dodgers do win, but I'm sure you have something aside from bemoaning that eventuality. You have something else to say about the World Series.
Well, first, I noticed Craig's hat. It's cold in New York, and our heat hasn't come on for winter. I happen to be wearing this sweatshirt. You can see it. Some of you from San Francisco will understand it. It says Third and Kings, and it's got the years because those are 3 World Series that the Giants have won in the last few years. So, and also,
how many have they won in the last 50?
And also, I appreciate the discussion about Dave Roberts and his predecessor, Don Mattingly, because San Francisco, we know a lot about baseball, but one thing we don't know well is managers who don't do well in the postseason. Having had a decade or so of Bruce Bochy, who was the best of his generation. Steve had a nice anecdote about his mother. I have a better one. My mother, who has had the extraordinary mazel of having 2 generations of Mitchell brothers, not those Mitchell brothers, those of you in San Francisco, 2 generations of Mitchell brothers going back to the 1970s, talking about baseball at her kitchen table, has decided she hasn't had enough and is on this call. So I learned in politics, you can't welcome every politician, but you should always welcome your mom. Hi, Mom. And also, I was very fortunate to have not 1, but 3 Jewish mothers. One of them, my grandmother, is not alive, but my second Jewish mother, my mother's sister, Aunt Judy, is on the call too. So I want to say hi to both my mom and Aunt Judy.
Hi, Mother Mitchell.
We can call her Susan.
Hi, Susan.
I've actually really enjoyed this postseason, which I'm not predisposed to really enjoy anything, basically. But I did enjoy this. I have been enjoying this postseason a lot. And I feel like it worked much better than the regular season. The regular season was way too short to feel like a season. It started late. There were COVID scares. There was the schedule constantly changing. There were these, frankly, stupid Little League rules that I don't even like when I was coaching Little League. But the postseason has been fun. You had those wacky 2 first, that round of the 3-game series, right? But then you had what seemed like what we've come to recognize as normal postseason baseball, ending with, of all things, a World Series between the teams with the 2 best records, which hasn't happened since 2013. And I wonder whether this turns some of the conventional kind of wisdom about baseball is that because of the multi-team, multi-level playoffs, it's harder for anyone to get through, which is true, obvious, and an unhelpful insight, right? Because obviously it's harder to win 10 games than 4 games or, whatever the equation is. But maybe it's harder for a bad team. A bad team can get lucky in 1 series. I mean, the Mets, for example, and they weren't a bad team, but the Mets, for example, 1973, probably not as good as the Reds team that they beat. It's easy to get, and they came within basically 1 or 2 runs of winning the World Series that year. But it's harder to get through 4 series. So we actually have a World Series between 2 very good teams. And that I'm enjoying as a fan. Now, I should add that I'm not only a fan, but I'm very cheap. And I don't get broadcast television, right? Unless if the Giants or Yankees are, I think, going to play long, I'll buy into the postseason. I'll buy Spectrum or something for October. But basically, I'm listening to all of this on the radio, reading about it, and looking at the highlights the next day. So I'm experiencing it a little differently, but I am enjoying it. One thing I have gotten from this, and this is just for me as a fan who spends too much time thinking about these kind of things, is it has broken down the hegemony of the 162-game season. I no longer think that 162 games with a schedule of the kind that we've come to have over the last 60 or so years has to happen, right? And by the way, Craig, the Dodgers have won 2 World Series in the last 50 years. Thank you. And 3 is still more than 2, even in Dave Roberts' math. But we think that 154 or 162 games is what a season has to be. But what I'm feeling after this season is that it doesn't. And that we may be switching towards, a longer tournament style postseason and a shorter regular season. And whereas the part of me that says, what does, a 200 hits or a 400 batting average or something mean in a shorter season, that part of me is always going to be there. But, it's hard enough to compare across eras, a segregated era with an era like today, an era where baseball, most teams only had 6 batters in the lineup with today, when most major league teams were not better than, half a dozen minor league Negro teams, et cetera, Negro league teams, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm okay with the hegemony of the long season, relatively short playoffs, relative to the regular season breaking down. Having said that, I like the World Series because I feel like this is how the baseball season ends. The one exception is 1994. Even 1981, other than the fact that Game 6 went the wrong way, the season ended well, like it was a World Series. We could process that. The 2 teams that America was used to seeing in the World Series were in the World Series in '81. The wrong team won, but that's life. I want to just focus on a couple on the field things that really strike me from watching this World Series. With all the talk of bullpenning and the bizarre mishandling of pitchers, which Aaron Boone made Dave Roberts look like Casey Stengel with his mishigosh, to use a technical term, in Game 2 of the playoff series against the Rays. Starting pitchers are still important. The Dodgers may win this World Series and have Walker Buehler and Clayton Kershaw combined for all 4 wins, right? Or all 4 games, those being the games that they won. That's kind of that's like Koufax and Drysdale, not quite. But I mean, so with all this talk, you still need really good starting pitching, and a team with really good starting pitching may win on because of that. Additionally, Tyler Glasnow has been terrible in the postseason. And he was that second starting pitcher. If Tyler Glasnow steps up, this is a different World Series. So the World Series hasn't gone away. I mean, the starting pitching hasn't gone away, and I've enjoyed that. And one last point, because we mentioned it before, but that play to end Game 4, as someone who has, I root against the Dodgers and pretty much no matter what my whole life, except for when they played the Red Sox. But I don't have a strong passion for the Rays. They're just an ordinary American League team in my mind. It's hard for me to get excited. Randy Arozarena is the exception. This is an exciting, fun player who I've totally enjoyed watching, except for in that series against the Yankees. But what struck me about that play was it like I totally reiterate what Tova said. That was just such a fun, exciting play, right? The outfielder makes a poor play. The catcher can't hold on to the ball. The runner falls down and is on his hands and knees, and he somehow crawls across the plate, realizes what's happened, and slaps his hand on the plate in excitement. That was great, fun baseball. Perhaps the funnest I've seen, watching a highlight in baseball in a long time. But I had a question because his name came up earlier. Someone, I think Tova mentioned Mookie Betts, who's one of the best players in the game today. Go back and watch that video, right? On a fly ball to anyone in the outfield, the center fielder is the kind of the captain out there. And if he can get to it, he catches it. On that play, he cut off Betts. I didn't see him. I mean, this is just from watching it. Betts charges in, has a better angle. If he picks it up and throws it, I think they get the guy. And the other piece of this, if you've ever played first base, as I did, you know that cutoff. And it's actually a tougher cutoff than it looks. Not because of catching the ball from the outfielder and not because of turning around and making the throw, but because it's such a short throw to the catcher. So the catcher has more time to kind of judge the throw coming in from a strong-armed right fielder. If Betts gets that ball and throws it through the cutoff man, right, coming up the right fielder with a better arm and a better angle moving towards the ball and moving towards home plate, I think he gets them. Now, can we prove that? I mean, I guess StatCast could make an argument, but basically the answer is no, we can't prove that. But if I'm a Dodger fan, which is not the case, but if I were, and if the Rays manage to come back and win the next 2 games, I'm going to be asking myself that question for a long time. And that's what makes baseball fun. So I have enjoyed this World Series more than, frankly, I wanted to, or I thought I would, but it's been very exciting. And, here we are. And it's going to end with the World Series, which is how baseball should end.
Yeah, the Game 4 ending has come up multiple times. I'm sure many people on this session also enjoyed it. Yeah, it reminded me of a lot of, I don't know, the Francisco Cabrera hit 92, Barry Bonds, one of those, plays with the plate endings. It was on. I mean, maybe not on that level, but certainly it reminded me of that. And I think your point here, Lincoln, and made a number of points here about the 162 games schedule is spot on. I mean, I'm one of those who like shorter postseason, but that's not going to happen. So maybe the shorter regular season is the way that the league is going to go. And I think you're right. It didn't even dawn on me until you said this. This is one of the rare cases where you had 2 teams with the best records make it through the World Series. That hasn't happened. It's usually the wild card who comes in, the Cardinals of 2011 or 2006, or one of these teams that are come out of nowhere to win the World Series. And so in that sense, that's been very refreshing. And yes, it is true. Mookie Betts hasn't come up. My daughter here is jumping up and down because she's a big Mookie Betts fan. His defense has been outstanding. I mean, he set the tone last night with the hit in the beginning of the first inning, right, to kind of change the mood of the game right away for the Dodgers. So, yeah, no, that's been some interesting storylines, and hopefully we'll see some more. Okay. And I've seen a number of comments in the chat reiterating a number of points that have been made. I'm going to try to circle back to these comments later. So we're going to shift gears to the elephant in the room, and that is this thing that's happening now, and we'll well, it probably won't conclude on November 3rd, but November 3rd election day. I'm a historian, as many of you know. There's a couple of historians in this group and in the audience. And I was really trying to find an analogous political moment in US history where the World Series is happening in an intense moment of political polarization. And I came up with this one. So I'm going to, like I did last, I'm going to play a quick clip. It's shorter. I think you should be able to hear it. It's 2 minutes long. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm going to ask you to tell us what you think this event was, and we'll use that as a way to segue us into the next question. Okay, so bear with me. Share my screen.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. Please rise and join in the singing of our national anthem, which will be played by Merle Alby's band and will be sung by Jose Feliciano. Oh, see, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed, and the twilight light goes broad bright and bright stars in the perilous fight for the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets rang clear, the bombs bursting in air. They gave through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land and for the free and the home of the brave? Yeah, yeah.
So I think folks in the chat know what that was. That was Jose Feliciano's performance of the national anthem before Game 5 of the 1968 World Series at Tiger Stadium, an event that was memorable for a variety of reasons. Of course, he was roundly criticized and experienced the degree of persecution after this performance because it was not a straight-ahead performance of the national anthem, as many people know, right? It was seen as inappropriate. Particularly in a year of intense political polarization, the assassinations of King and Kennedy, the violence of the Democratic Convention in October of that year at 68, everything else that's happening, the Tet Offensive, et cetera. And of course, he, as a Puerto Rican, at once a citizen and a colonial subject of the United States of America, right? Reinterpreting the national anthem, right? And altering that ritual in a profound way so that recording artists do what he did that day all the time. Of course, that was exactly the same month as Tommy Smith and John Carlos's Black Power salute at the 1968 games in Mexico City. So, when I think of this year, the only year that approximates, something like we're experiencing now, to me, there are others, of course, is 1968, when the politics of the moment intruded itself on baseball in that small way, and as it has here in 2020. So, and yes, a number of people are highlighting many moments from that year. There's a new documentary, The Trial of the Chicago 7, which I have not seen yet, but I'm hearing it's good. Mickey Lolich apparently blamed Feliciano for not getting off to a good start in that game. That's typical Mickey Lolich. He was kind of a whiner that way, although he won the game, a complete game, and led the Tigers back to victory in that World Series. So, as I think about where we are now, I thought of 68, as many people have. A lot of people are reflecting on the polarizations of 50 years ago. So I wanted to ask our panelists, and then we will have a larger discussion about their thoughts about what's transpiring here as we head to November 3rd. Many parts of the country have started early voting, including New York for the first time. Some voting is happening in sports arenas, which I'm very happy to see as somebody who studied sports and society and stadiums and cities. So I want to know what we think about what's happening here. How will the election affect the course of the pandemic? What would a Biden victory mean for the country? I think we probably have an answer of what would a Trump victory mean, a stolen election. We could talk about that if you want. What will the election do? Will it alter the course of the pandemic? Will it do anything to alter the ongoing police violence that we see all the time, the neoliberal capitalist dehumanization that we see everywhere all the time in this country? There are many other topics we could raise, but I figured I'd just start with those, just to throw those out there, and you can go in any direction you want. And I figured we should start with Lincoln, because Lincoln, this was his idea to have the election special, as somebody who's worked on campaigns, as a close follower of politics. So let's start with you, Lincoln.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. I'm glad you started with me, because typically I've been on, I cannot know how many panels or TV shows since Trump became president. And invariably what happens is the person before me weaves out some horrible negative scenario, and I have to begin by saying I'm not quite as optimistic as the person who spoke before me. I tell my students that when someone says this isn't so bad compared to the late 1960s, that's a generational cri de coeur. It's the political equivalent of saying, hey man, you should have been at Woodstock, which is my way of saying things are really bad right now. And I should also say that I'm not a baseball writer. I'm a political scientist. I teach American politics. I've worked in American politics. I spend most of my time writing, reading, and speaking about this stuff and teaching about this. So this has really been on my mind a lot. And so I'm going to try to summarize very quickly some of my main thoughts. I want to begin by telling you what I think each one of us needs to be thinking about over the next several weeks, which is Michelle Obama, most notably at the convention, but others have stressed, make a voting plan. And I think that's obvious. You got to vote in this thing, no matter where you live, even if you live in a safe state. The telling a story of Trump getting drubbed is going to be essential for him getting out of office. But also make a democracy plan. As we get into the end of this week, figure out where the demonstrations, if you're young and healthy enough to go out, right, where the demonstrations will be in your community to ensure that Trump leaves after he loses. Make sure that you have enough PPE to go to those demonstrations, that you have power bars, that you have, canteens or water bottles or something like that. Be prepared. If you're not able to go out, think about maybe having enough food for a few days, right? This election was never going to end on January 20th with whoever your Democratic candidate was back in 2017 having their hand on the Bible and Donald Trump and Melania smiling gracefully. It was never going to end there, and it still isn't. In February of 2017, when I wrote my first piece about Trump not leaving if he loses, I was told I was nuts. Now it's become conventional wisdom. This is where we are, and we have to recognize that. It was never going to end smoothly. And we have to think about what we're going to do to ensure that he leaves office when he loses. We spent a lot of time talking about the threat of it happening, now that we've all kind of processed that. We are told from too many people who also told us not to worry about this possibility, that the lawyers will save us, the courts will do this. Lawyers will not save us. We're going to have a legal strategy, but we're going to have a democracy and a mobilization strategy. I think I've said this, maybe not on this seminar, but the Belarusian election was August 9th, and they're still trying to get Lukashenko out of there, right? So we have to be prepared for a long, long struggle. I want to also, but there's something more here that I think is kind of gnawing at me, which is this. This election, in fact, the whole Trump presidency has highlighted the tension between the Constitution and what we would understand to be democracy, and highlighted the notion that the United States can either live according to its Constitution or it can try to be a democracy, but it can really no longer do both. And we see this week, where a president elected by a minority of the people from a political party that no longer even tries to get the majority in a general election because it knows it can't, will appoint someone to the third branch of the legislature, which is now the Supreme Court, who will be confirmed by people representing a minority of the American people. That is where the Constitution has gotten us, right? If you are an activist, you'll hear over and over from the right that we're the ones with the guns, right? These militia groups, because of a clause in our Constitution, which I don't think is compatible with democracy at all, the Second Amendment, but is also always only applied to white people, right? So this tension is really profound, and it is coming to a head, frankly, in the next few weeks. And we have to be prepared, but we also intellectually have to be open to a lot of things happening. And I have with me a baseball, since this is a baseball crowd. I always try to make baseball metaphors. I always try not to make baseball metaphors because I'll bore people. And I was on, I think, an independent Russian channel, and I started to make, and I realized I had to make a soccer metaphor. And then I realized I don't know anything about soccer, so I couldn't. But I'm going to make a baseball metaphor. I want you to imagine that your team is at bat, and your player, like if you're Craig, it's Mookie Betts or someone, is up, right? And they hit the ball. And let's say my iPad here, it's orange, I don't know why, and they hit the ball. And if it goes over the fence, it's a home run and you're happy. And if it gets caught, it's an out, right? And now for the purpose of this is the election. If Donald Trump, if it here doesn't make it to the fence, that's Donald Trump catching it, that's an out. And that's the consolidation of a semi-authoritarian regime, right? But the ball's not going to go over the fence. A Joe Biden victory is not the ball going over the fence and us getting democracy. Stop me if this is too weird of a metaphor. The Biden victory is the ball being up here somewhere where we're not sure. It might go over the fence, be a home run, and it might get caught by the outfielder for the other team. A Biden victory preserves the possibility of moving the United States meaningfully towards democracy in the coming years, but it doesn't guarantee it, and it doesn't mean it's happened. Which is not to say you shouldn't vote and you shouldn't vote for Biden, right? There are two choices here. You're either on Team MAGA or voting for Biden. There's no middle ground here. As to borrow a phrase from Mark Maron, the Dodgers and the Rays are in the World Series now. You can't go out there and root for the Indians or the Astros or something, right? I mean, the game has changed. And I want to make one last point. I believe, typically, if we were in a typical election, what we'd be thinking about is who's going to win. Right. And who's going to win control of the Senate? The House isn't being contested, and who's going to win the White House? And that's what we'd be thinking about, and we spend a lot of time on that horse race. And when we do it, we sometimes do it to the detriment of understanding what's really going on. Because I believe that the range of possible outcomes is much greater here than we're really thinking. And I'm just going to give you a couple examples. And if I were Nate Silver, I would make a complicated mathematical model, make sure it aligned with my opinion, and then put a number on it. Instead, I'm just going to pick a number that seems about right. There is a 1% chance. That means a 99% chance that it doesn't happen, but a 1% chance that we have a Tiananmen Square style massacre in the United States in the next month. Now, that's a low number. You wouldn't take that bet. But in previous years, a week or so before the election, you'd say it's a 1 in 10,000, not 1 in 100. There's a 1 in 100 chance that Donald Trump is fleeing the White House for the Russian embassy at some time in the next month. Again, 99% chance that it doesn't happen. And we can quibble with these numbers. I'm pulling them out of my head. I don't know. But I just want to think about the breadth of the possibilities. There is a real possibility, much greater, maybe 30%, that 2 or 3 weeks from now, the outcome of this election is being disputed, largely nonviolently, but in some cases with guns, on the American streets. There's a non-zero possibility that Donald Trump, and Tova will speak to some of these issues better than I will, or more than I will, because I won't. I'll just make her do it, ask her to do it, through voter suppression, that Donald Trump just steals this election, just bullies and cheats his way to the election, and that we end up with a second illegitimate Trump term. And there's a chance that we have a meaningful democratic breakthrough. Because when you push and push and push on a system like this, you sometimes get that breakthrough. So I'm going to end there because I don't want to talk forever. You can find me talking about all this stuff in other places, but maybe that gives us something to kind of think about as we move to the next questions.
Yeah, I was struck by, I think if I'm paraphrasing you correctly, you said that a Biden victory would help, I'm paraphrasing, move us toward democracy. It almost sounded like you were talking about another country and, in the non-Western world, I don't know if that was intentional, but I mean, I think that summarized what I heard a lot of what you're saying here, which is that there's a lot more at stake here than, we need a Democrat back in the White House, right? I mean, I think many of us feel that way. I mean, I'm certainly in that camp. This is a question of not restoring democracy. Really, it has to be a reconstitution of it. Otherwise, it's just going to proceed the way it has, even before Trump, wound up in the White House. More to say, but I want to get to Steve.
Let me just say that the other great thing that Jose Feliciano should be remembered for his great service to this country is he actually made the music of the Doors listenable. And I just on one song, but that's all there really was to salvage there. I went on a kick trying to find more, but no, there wasn't more. Just his version of Light My Fire, which was a serious upgrade. When you learn about history and the Constitution in junior high school or high school, they always tell you about the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and they give you this anecdote about Benjamin Franklin, that he made this speech right before they were going to vote on that document. And even that by itself is inaccurate, because Franklin was pretty old at that time. He was, he was born in 1706. So he would have been a little over 80, which was very unusual for that time. And he wasn't well, so he would sort of scribble out things on notes and hand them off to somebody else who would read them, which really ruins the movie that's never going to be made about this. But the part that they always give you is a partial quote. And what it is that he said, or through this intermediary, he said, I don't know if this is the best Constitution, but it's the best one that we were capable of coming up with. And therefore, having grown old and learned to doubt myself, I hope that everybody else will learn to doubt themselves equally, and that they will put aside their qualms and vote for this thing, because we're just not going to do any better. The part that they never give you from this inspirational story, they do give you the bit about it's still there too, if you go to look for it, the sun on the back of George Washington's chair, that Franklin didn't know whether it was rising or setting. And, once they adopt the Constitution, he says, now I know it's a rising sun. But what he said during that speech was, I believe it's a good Constitution, and it will do well if administered properly for a period of years, until the point that the people require despotism, being so corrupted as to not be capable of any other form of government. The reason that we have survived so long as a constitutional republic is because for a long time our secular religion was that document, and people were deferential to it, even to the point of their own venality. Thus, Nixon resigned instead of toughing it out and didn't pardon himself. Even he didn't want to transgress that document. We're at a point now where I feel like we're so alienated from it that we have reached the moment that the inflection point that Franklin predicted, that we are vulnerable to despotism. And we've tiptoed up to that line a number of times in the course of American history. But I think that we're finally there, and that troubles me. As we speak tonight, and some of you may know better than I do, because I've been focused on what we're talking about here today. As we've been speaking, the Senate is preparing to launch Amy Coney Barrett onto the Supreme Court. You will note tonight that if you've been to the previous ones of these that we've done, this is the fifth one. This is the first time I've worn this eye patch. If you've seen me before, I have an eye under here. I'm very self-conscious about that eye, because back about 16 years ago, I was unfortunate enough to have ocular cancer, and the treatment destroyed the vision in that eye. When you don't use an eye, it sort of drifts out of alignment. So from my perspective, I look like Stevie Wonder, or at least half my face does. That if he ever takes off his glasses, is sort of a Muppet Cookie Monster look. And this is my pre-existing condition. There's, unlike a lot of other cancers, it may yet come back and kill me, even though it has been a long time and it has not metastasized. I am protected by the laws of my state, which is New Jersey, that as long as I'm continuously insured, I cannot be denied coverage on this basis. But if, like a lot of Americans, my coverage is interrupted because I or my wife are unemployed for a significant period of time, I will lose that protection. When Amy Coney Barrett goes to the Supreme Court and ends Obamacare, as I expect her to do, if the laws of New Jersey, or if that event should ever befall me, then I will be shut out from the insurance market for the rest of my life. And the only reason that I am alive is because I've had that great privilege, because when the very innocent symptoms of this first presented themselves to me, I said to myself, it's probably nothing, but I have the insurance. It won't cost me anything to go get it checked out. And so I'll do that. And so I have this, and I have this personal vulnerability that I now share with 7-8 million COVID victims, or COVID people in the United States, a non-trivial percentage of the population who are vulnerable this way. Similarly, I have friends and relatives who are gay and are now married, and they could lose that status in a Supreme Court that backtracks from the right to privacy or the right to sexual freedom. And similarly, we've already seen, even without Justice Barrett, as I will take the liberty of unfortunately calling her, we've seen the Voting Rights Act gutted, the pre-clearance aspect of it destroyed, which means that the red states can do what they, all states, frankly, it's not any one party, but can do what they feel like doing to disenfranchise particularly minority voters. And I find that aspect of things fascinating, by the way, because, you know, we've seen both Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell say, if we have universal voting, a Republican will never be elected again. If the Democrats make Puerto Rico or Washington, D.C. a state, then that's 4 more senators for the Democrats and we'll never get our way again. But why? Why is that inevitable? Why not have popular policies that appeal to the majority of people and let the marketplace of ideas sort out whether you are going to be a viable political party or not, instead of relying on the Supreme Court and these suppressive measures to keep you in power? And the answer is that we really, again, have reached that dysfunctional state that Franklin predicted, at least on the part of one party. We have a party that is dedicated to keeping itself in power by any means other than the vote, which is why, and because of his particular dysfunction, I do expect that on election night, no matter what all the various decision desks say, that Donald Trump will get up at the podium and say that he's been reelected, that they retook the House and kept the Senate. And then he'll just hope that somehow it gets sorted out for him in the same way that it did for George W. Bush. I know I'm going on very long, but what I just want to leave you with is that this constitutional system, and this works in baseball too. There are certain things in baseball we don't do because they're dumb and they would ruin the game. And we're talking about particularly some of the violent things that have subsequently been outlawed, but they were unusual even before they were outlawed, like knocking the second baseman into the short center field on a takeout slide, or throwing at every batter who comes up. The game stops being functional. And similarly, our national game, the political game, stops being functional when one party is dedicated to the maximal use of power at all times. And that's why it's not easy to get out of this. So a lot of people I know and respect who are saying, well, if Biden gets in, we get the Senate, then he should enlarge the court. But then someday the Republicans will enlarge the court too. And then we'll enlarge the court again. And I say we, even though it's not really we. But the point being that then it will just be dysfunctional. And so we have to have a greater adherence to the system of government than we do to individual party. And I'm afraid that's been lost. As you may have guessed from my name that I'm a Jewish person. And my family has been using this Passover Haggadah, that's the batting order for the Seder, that I think was written about 1948 or 1950 for my whole life. And it's kind of very subtly a Cold War Haggadah with like a lot of these shots at the Russians as you go through, and sort of analogizing the flight from Egypt as a fight against global communism and totalitarianism and all that stuff. And it concludes by saying that in every generation, the battle is the battle for greater and greater freedoms. And that as humanity has advanced through time, it has enlarged the number of rights and freedoms that all people have. But when you think about what the Republicans are attempting to do for this country in this election, and particularly with some of the rights that I've outlined, I didn't even mention the right of a woman to make her own choice when it comes to pregnancy. They are proposing an agenda that would actually roll back various freedoms that Americans have achieved over the last 50 years. And I think in a lot of ways that's unprecedented. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing the very real consequences in their very varied forms in your comments there. Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the takeaways that I hear in what you're saying, which many of us know already, and certainly those who study the Black experience in this country know this very well, is that freedom is never given. It has to be struggled for all the time. Democracy, well, has never been achieved fully for the dispossessed in this country, right? And I think 2020 is showing us, and certainly even before that, how what that really means for a broader constituency, right? And I think that's clear. I think both you and Lincoln are highlighting the real consequences of what might transpire here over the next few weeks. We have a specialist in voting and voting suppression, and has been following a number of the developments happening here over the last few months and weeks. Tova, tell us, give us a sense of what you're thinking.
Yeah, so I mean, since I have the joy of doing this as my job, I probably won't talk very long, and I'll let other people talk about this some more. I have, for my entire adult life, been doing this, and the fortunate part is that I met Lincoln this way, and a couple other people who are on the call, so that's nice. But since 2000 election in particular, this has been my life's work. I wrote a book that came out in 2012 called The Politics of Voter Suppression, very much talking about what Steve was just referring to in it. And it has for the last 55 years been one party. And so I'll just talk a little bit about what I know best, which is, about voter suppression, and then what I think some of the counterbalance actually is this year. I mean, so obviously we have had voter suppression since the country began, in very blatant forms and more subtle forms, some of it very similar to what's happened in recent decades, some of it a little bit different. And, that's happening this year too. It's always the claim that it's, to prevent fraud, that these kinds of rules that disenfranchise people are erected, or, that is not a new way of disenfranchising people. It's actually, I know this is counterintuitive and probably maybe not even true. I just think it, but it's actually striking to me that the only person who's really screaming about fraud is Trump and his henchmen. And actually not the people who usually do, which are the very ideological Republican elections officials that we've had in the past. And I'll get to that in a second, but it's really amazing the way this guy has manipulated every aspects of our beings. But, so there's always been voter suppression. You can read my book and others to find out about that. Obviously, the vote by mail thing has made things a little bit different this year in terms of how that's happening. Including the requirements for who can vote absentee, requiring it to be notarized, your ballot, all the stuff with the Postal Service, all those kinds of things. There, all the technical aspects of that. And that's all happening. And some other newer things, I suppose, are the Dropbox situation, and in Texas and Ohio, it's craziness about the elections officials there, though really Texas is really the worst this year, only after Florida perhaps, but not allowing more than one Dropbox per polling place. And speaking of Florida, really the biggest act of disenfranchisement and voter suppression this year happened 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago. I started working on the campaign to get voting rights restored for people who had felony convictions in Florida in 2015. And in 2018, the people of Florida voted 2-1 in favor of restoring the voting rights to people who had been incarcerated if they had completed their sentences. Almost immediately, the governor and state legislature in Florida passed a law saying that meant that you had paid all your fines and fees associated with your sentence. Knowing that, number one, most of the people who this affected couldn't pay them because they were in the thousands and thousands of dollars. And number two, there was actually no way for people to even find out what they owed because there was no centralized database with that information available. This went up and down the courts, and the last ruling was that, in fact, the Republicans won, and now they have effectively scare it off or actually disenfranchise all the people that the people in Florida voted should be reenfranchised. So that is the one thing that I will spend just a little time talking about. There are obviously all the other enfranchisement stuff that we've been going on about for a long time. I want to I am gonna sound like I'm the positive one, and sorry, I don't mean to, but I've actually been incredibly impressed, honestly, this year with how elections officials have responded, and I really do believe they are the unsung heroes. I have done battle with many secretaries of state over the last 20 years, and this year Florida and Texas, I would still, but even Newton, Ohio is not nearly as bad as his predecessors. And in fact, I think the overwhelming majority of elections officials want this election to go well, don't want any of this crap at their doorstep. They don't want any of this. They got into this business to run elections, and except for a small handful of them, that's what they want to see happen. And I think that they are our frontline workers, and I have a lot of faith in them and what they're going to do. And then the last thing is we're seeing is the response of people and the voters. Now I don't know what this is going to be, in the final outcome, but over 63 million people have already voted in this election. I'm like, who's going to be even left for election day? I have these visions of, these militias or whoever, Proud Boys, showing up at the polls to intimidate people on election day, and the only people who are voting are Republicans, and they're all just going to aim their guns at each other. And it's been particularly youth, huge youth turnout, which I was really hoping for, not as high as I would like, but we'll see how that goes. And then one really interesting thing, because I've been harping on Texas, is that about 7.5 million people have voted in Texas already. And that's 80% of the total number of people who voted in 2016. And so, regardless of, I suppose, the outcome, that all is great. And we'll have to see, like you guys have been talking about, where we go from there. Even if Biden wins, we've had this incredible activism and the social movements that have been happening that we've talked about a lot, and rising role of sports and civic activism and civic engagement, all these kinds of things. We'll have to see where they go from here too. But I do want to, just say something for the unbelievable amount of involvement in this election, from the administrators to the voters, and even, stores, restaurants, corporate America, usual celebrities, all those kinds of things, has been pretty extraordinary. So I am finding a ray of hope in that, I suppose.
Oh, well, thank you. That Texas stat is really interesting, among the other statistics you gave us. And I love the notion you're putting here as the election official, the frontline worker. The frontline worker is being redefined in 2020. And I think those who are working at these polls and also those who are trying to make this as an organized and fair process as one can, certainly should be included in that category, right? I think that's an excellent point. And it is true. I mean, I've been inspired by some of the scenes I've seen on TV so far, or even the drum line that started the voting in Brooklyn outside the Barclays Center. There are a lot of things like that are very interesting, the kind of reinvigoration and redefinition of this tradition that we have. And maybe that's one of that. Hopefully that'll be a takeaway from this year. Adrian, you lived in Florida. I'm not going to ask you to talk about that, but when she was talking, I thought of you, but I'm sure you have other things to say too about what you think is transpiring here with the election.
I'm glad I no longer live in Florida for a number of reasons. I'll take the cold in Illinois over the rain that is DeSantis in Florida. Even though one of the interesting things about Florida, and I shared this with a couple of friends, so the Biden campaign actually did an interesting ad where it featured Puerto Ricans from the island talking to their brethren and sisters and family members in Florida, and basically saying, vote for us. We can't vote in this election, but remember what happened after Hurricane Maria and what's happening now on our island under the austerity programs that have been implemented. So that was really fascinating, because it's one of the rare moments in which the recognition of the growing Puerto Rican population that is in Florida, that is in the Orlando Metroplex, has the ability to vote right now, and should be someone that is being targeted as, yes, they're colonial subjects, but now they reside in a place where they can vote in the federal election. The other thing that really has on a certain level shaken me is just thinking about how we've come to such a state of distrust of the institutions that at one point we built our system of government and mutuality as a nation, as a collective in. When I heard about how certain mail drop boxes for votes were being torched, I thought about where is a safe place where we could place a vote drop box, a ballot drop box. And I thought, we can't really put in police departments anymore, can we? I mean, do we really trust police and just the fact that I asked that question and I was having this conversation with my wife, I'm like, man, where have we gotten to that I don't feel safe putting ballot drop boxes in police departments, and that's just a fascinating indictment of where we've been. Yes, I saw, as Frank just noted in the chat, police officers outside their squad car in Brooklyn, chanting Trump 2020 in full uniform, I guess for no other reason, just to let the people in the neighborhood know that they were present. So the other thing that, as a father of two young Latinas, two young women, two young girls, not yet fully women, in their maturation, like envisioning 4 years ahead is really challenging right now. What will we be able to repair if the election is ultimately secured by a new president, not Donald Trump? How do we repair our system of rights and justice and begin to address how we have kids who have been separated, asylum seekers who were separated from their parents, who now the government can't locate their parents, but those are just 545 of many who have been separated, who have been torn apart because they were fleeing the violence that was a consequence of US policy in Central America. Immigrants, asylum seekers are not afforded the same rights of human rights to a hearing. You have a 3-year-old kid who was asked, do you understand these proceedings? And it's adjudicated. You cannot stay here. Those dimensions of our system of governance, of our rights, of our humanity, our shared humanity, have to be repaired. And, we have a lot of work ahead of us. And, here in Lincoln, I was recently helping family out in New York for a couple of weeks. And yeah, the idea of like, be ready for a period of quite a bit of discomfort. And by discomfort is, think about all those long distance truckers and how they might be motivated or attacked by those who want to disrupt commerce, the flow of food and goods from place to place, so that they can make their upset unknown. Trump's declaration and kind of his positioning toward the governor of Michigan and toward the governor of Virginia, these are in a very different way in the 1960s after Brown v. Board, after Brown v. Board 2, and the effort to move states into a compliance of sorts with the push for integration was one particular dynamic. But now we're kind of seeing the inverse of that, in which Trump's administration really pushing to attack governors of certain states and kind of saying, people have the right to express their upset, and having local municipalities, local sheriffs saying, you have the right to apprehend the governor of your state for not complying with the laws of the state. And it's just, all of these things speak to me about why we still have a lot of work to do. They won't be resolved on November 2nd, November 3rd, or November 4th, 5th. And even after January 2021, it's just a lot of work ahead of us. And man, it's hard for me to grasp that I'm raising my kids in a different America than I was raised in. And I'm not that old. And it's just like mind-blowing that we have, in a certain sense, reverted to a place, or have we even been here before? And that's kind of what still troubles me, because I'm starting to think, I don't think this nation has really been here before this way with these stakes.
It's hard to follow these comments. Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought up, the struggles of undocumented peoples, of Latinx, Latino, Latin American immigrants. Being a parent in this time is profoundly difficult, as it is for even, for many of us. The Puerto Rican case is very interesting. There's been a lot of discussion about Latino voters in the election that are a little different than normal. Jerry Cadava has a new book. It's called The Hispanic Voter. I believe that's the title. He's a historian, looks at kind of the long trajectory of Latino voters in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, how that's changed over time. I think the answer to that question is I don't think we've been here before. I really don't. That's why the 68 parallel doesn't really work either. It works in terms of polarization, but we have an illegitimate state, and I'm not sure that we could describe LBJ's regime in the same way that we could describe this, in terms of legitimacy. Certainly people on the left saw it as illegitimate, right, for what it was doing in Vietnam, but there's no attempt to manufacture consent here whatsoever, except for the Trumpian base. Craig.
So first, I'll take it back to where we began here with Jose Feliciano, because I did have one factoid about that was kind of fun. Lighten it up a minute too. There's a fellow by the name of Charlie Iranian who lives about 2 miles from me. Charlie was, he's probably in his 70s now. Charlie grew up in Detroit, and he managed to get a job the way people could get a job with a baseball team back in the early 1960s. He was a teenage kid, and he just hung around Tiger Stadium long enough, or Briggs Stadium, I think it still was at the time. And someone saw that he was plucky and gave him a job, and he worked his way up through the baseball ranks for 30 some years. Early in his journey, Charlie had a job where he was basically just a gopher for John Fetzer, who was the owner of the Detroit Tigers in the 60s through the early 80s, and did this, did that. In 1968, during the World Series, he was basically assigned to John Fetzer's wife to just whatever you need. If she needs a coffee, if she needs a cigarette lit or something, you hang around her, Charlie, and you do it. He was standing next to John Fetzer's wife during the national anthem that Jose Feliciano sang. And I know all this because I ran into him. He was working a part-time job, a retirement job at the Ace Hardware right near my house. I was wearing a Tigers hat that day. See, Link and I have other hats. And we started talking baseball. He told me who he was. But he's standing next to John Fetzer's wife that afternoon for the national anthem. And Fetzer's wife starts yelling to anyone who will hear, unplug his mic, stop him, stop him, stop him. And she's looking at Charlie, who I think at the time was like 17, trying to get him to go and end the national anthem on a national broadcast. And he wouldn't do it. Actually, he started to look around, didn't know what he was going to do. A couple of people who were like aides to John Fetzer was like, no, don't stop. Just don't listen to her. Anyway, that's his story about Jose Feliciano's thing. He gave me a bunch of stories. He went on to go work for the White Sox. He ran whatever version of American soccer we had in the 70s. I can't remember. He worked all kinds of jobs in baseball, and now he's just retired living in New Albany, Ohio, of all places. But anytime I think of the Jose Feliciano thing, I think of his story. Back to more depressing topics. As we've been talking here, they voted to confirm the new justice, which is depressing. We are certainly going to be, I think, we're already experiencing a steady stream of court opinions and orders that have one message and one message only, and that's the court and its Republican backers do not want your vote to count. They don't want people's vote to count. Democracy is not something they're particularly interested in. I think they're going to do whatever they can to try to steal the election for Trump if it is close. Today, Brett Kavanaugh gave the court a tool to do that, or at least suggested the court will use a tool to do that. I forget what state it was in. I'm sure Tova knows more than I do, but it was either Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, whatever ruling came today about they're not going to count late absentee ballots. In 2000, during Bush v. Gore, and I won't get too law wonky on you. For those of you who might know, I'm a lawyer by training, so I think about this stuff a lot. In Bush v. Gore, Justice Rehnquist, in a dissent or a concurrence, said that he thinks that not only did they have the power to decide that case, that he thought the Supreme Court had the power to go to any individual state on its own and say, no, we think that's wrong what you just did, state election officials or state legislature. We have a right to protect the election. The most judicial bit of judicial activism one could possibly imagine. And it was so bold that it was just unpalatable to Justice Kennedy and Justice O'Connor. They did not include it in their final decision in Bush v. Gore because that was just too far over the top. Today, Brett Kavanaugh endorsed that view, specifically citing that dissent. If it is close, if there are states where there are things thrown into litigation or uncertainty, this Supreme Court will reach down. They will grab those states on their own and issue rulings, legitimate or not, I think, to throw this election. Do I think it'll happen? No, I'm going to take an optimistic tack here. I think Trump's going to lose this election by about 10 million votes in the popular vote. I know that doesn't matter. But I think in the states where it does matter, I don't think it's going to be that close. I'm cautiously optimistic about where it's going to be, despite all the efforts of people to suppress the vote. I think places like Michigan, places like Wisconsin, places like even Pennsylvania, with all the difficulties that are thrown up, I'm perhaps naively confident that it's going to not be close enough to where even these rat fuckers, pardon my expression, are going to be able to fuck this rat. And part of the reason I want to believe that is because what Tova said about the people on the ground. My last job before I became a full-time baseball writer, I worked for the Ohio Attorney General's office, and I was an assistant attorney general in the constitutional offices section, which is the section of the AG's office which defends the governor, the legislature, the secretary of state, the big statewide office holders. Part of my job there was to do the bidding, whatever that bidding happened to be, not the political bidding, but the legal bidding of the Secretary of State of Ohio. At the time, it was Jennifer Brunner, a Democrat who's now running for the Supreme Court here. And it was about, if there were disputes about election disputes, come on and do it and deal with it in a litigation footing. I think that the institutions are still strong enough, even though we have come to understand that institutions are only as strong as people who are willing to defend them. But I do think that outside of the national level, the institutions still, even in places like Ohio, where the state government has become debased by any number of forces, I think they're strong enough to withstand this. But the only reason they're strong enough to withstand this is because Trump is so singularly unpopular, and because he is, all things being equal, would be riding his way towards a historic defeat right now. If this were close, if this were a more competent would-be autocrat, I think we'd be really screwed. But I don't think it's going to be close enough to where that'll happen. Again, this time next week, I might be insane, or this time 8 days from now, I might be insane, but that's where I am right now. So in addition to that, my private practice of the law, I dealt with election laws in the Ohio Elections Commission. I actually defended a now indicted Republican politician, Ohio Speaker of the House, Larry Householder. I was his lawyer for a while, and he had an election contest that was close when he was embroiled in scandal, and I actually defended him and won an election contest in a trial for him. Even then, defending a indefensible person against, using some pretty archaic laws about election contests, I felt confident then, and I still feel confident now, that for everything that we want to believe about how bad things are, we can get through this. Again, if it wasn't Trump, maybe not. But that's where we are. And that's where, Lincoln began this, talking about what happens next, assuming I'm not naively wrong and assuming that Biden does win, and it's a sufficient enough win to where we aren't going to be embroiled in horribleness for the next 4 or 5 months. What happens? There's going to be a huge temptation, just an absolute huge temptation, to try to set the clock back to 2016 and say we're back to normal. That nightmare is over. We can't do it. We just can't. I know people can't stay on a war footing or whatever we want to call this for forever, but you can't just revert back, because that's what caused this problem. The reason Trump was able to do what he's been able to do, and the reason Mitch McConnell and all these other people who have acted in bad faith have been able to do what they've been able to do, is because they realized they could, and they wouldn't get pushed back, because we've always assumed that things would just run in a normal and predictable way. We have depended for 200 and some years on the good faith of the actors that we have put in power. We can't do that anymore. Does that mean that our side, if we want to call it our side, or the new side, the Biden side, the Democratic side, does that mean that they must act in concomitant bad faith? No, I don't think so. I don't think anybody can do that. But they have to understand the game. They have to understand that this is all about raw power now. And can you do that forever? Can you pack the court with 3 more and then worry about the GOP packing it with 4 more when they come back? Yeah, that's a huge concern. But you can't unilaterally disarm. If you find yourself in a fight and you need to punch somebody in the nose, you might worry about what happens when they punch you back, but that doesn't give you any choice except to punch. And then you got to worry about that with your next move. And I hate that we're there as a country. I hate that that's the only place I can find myself right now. It's anathema to everything I've ever believed about our country and our system. I've got 2 kids too. I've got a couple of teenagers, and they're getting ready to think about where they're going to go to college and what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. And for the first time in my entire life, I thought that, not that they don't have a future. They're bright kids. They're also privileged kids. Let's not lie. They're going to probably be okay. But are they going to want to make a future here? Are they going to want to make a future in the country the way we wanted to? I don't know. I am absolutely depressed at the state of this country. But the only way forward is forward. And I think that is, winning next week, punching as hard as we can punch until the fever breaks somehow. And I'd rather go down fighting than go down not fighting.
Thank you, Craig. So many things. We should have just went right to the election. We wasted a little time talking about baseball, but that's okay. That's all right. Baseball is important to this group. I just watched. It's related to a number of things. It said the 2012 documentary "United in Anger," directed by Jim Hubbard. It's about ACT UP, the very powerful coalition protest movement that emerged in the wake of the AIDS crisis. I just watched it yesterday, and I'm a social movement person, and what is so awe-inspiring about that movement, like many movements in this country's history, coming from the marginalized and the dispossessed, is the sheer anger and the life and deathness of their struggle. And I couldn't help it. It just resonated with me right now. I mean, that is the sort of attitude we need to have. This is about life and death. As far as I'm concerned, this is not just about, as Craig said, going back to the Obama era. The problems that we're experiencing now have been 50 years in the making, at least, right? And I think, when I viewed the post-Floyd protests this summer, I found it a cathartic moment, because somebody who hated the way this country was under the Obama era, right? As somebody who has seen the absolute ways in which tokenism and representational politics derails real justice in this society, right? And I think that that's what we see over and over again. Too often certainly in the last years since the Clinton era, right? We've been sold a certain image of what a democracy looks like with these folks in power, and then we're appalled at the Republicans. But that's just too easy. There's some harder issues here that we have to deal with. They're going to take the hard work that a number of us have highlighted here, and it took the hard work that people like that ACT UP were doing. Storming the CDC, storming the White House. That's kind of the work that we have ahead of us, regardless of what happens here. Somebody asked, why is the NYPD can stand out there and chant Trump 2020? Because these Democrats, de Blasio and Cuomo, don't curb police power, right? I mean, the police lobby is profoundly influential. They're as complicit in this situation as the power-hungry Republicans, as far as I'm concerned, as I've said before. Yeah, the ACT UP documentary is one should watch. I think it's actually a bit of an inspirational story, even as we watch people talking on the camera and seeing how they died after the film was made, or as the footage was taken. It's a powerful documentary. I urge you to see it. It's on, well, it's everywhere. Yes, it's a number of comments in the chat. We said we're going to do another round of discussion, but I do want to at least open up the possibility of somebody in the audience to chime in, and then maybe the panelists can jump in here. We're at 8:30 now, so if somebody wants to jump in here and offer a contribution, we'd love for you to do that. Reconstruction has come up in this conversation a couple of times. 1876 is another analogous moment, absolutely. Of course, that happened after a civil war. And one wonders if our Reconstruction moment that's going to happen, the third Reconstruction, isn't going to happen until the next civil war. Hopefully it won't, right? But I think we are looking at a third Reconstruction moment in US history for sure. And we've got some specialist Reconstruction in this discussion that have something to say. So anybody want to chime in?
Or has his hand up, so maybe we call him.
Sure, Robert, go. I'm trying to unmute you, hold on.
Okay, you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. A number of NBA teams, I think all NBA teams, or most of them, have opened up their venues for early voting and election day voting. I'm curious if anyone knows what the status of MLB venues are for that.
Milwaukee is opened, I believe.
Oh, did it open? Is that right?
Maybe not yet.
Yeah, a lot of the parks are open for early voting, and as someone is noting in the chat, as I have mentioned before, I live around the corner from the Nats Park, and they're going to start as an early voting center tomorrow. Yeah, a ton of them have. And
Dodger Stadium.
Dodger Stadium for sure. One among the first.
I've thrown out to Frank if anyone has ideas. I want to do a study of the impact that opening up the stadiums had on voter turnout and how people perceive the sports teams themselves and their place in civic life. Just putting that out there. No silly idea, but I'm really excited to maybe do that at some point.
That's good to me, because actually ballparks have had that function in the past. They actually have, and that needs to be revived. Those traditions, I think, and expanded. Other comments, questions? Surely people have things to say after these insightful comments of the panelists.
I had a question, Meredith.
Yes, Meredith, go.
There was something in the Athletic about MLB, back to baseball. For me, I got to say, baseball has really helped me get through this last few weeks. And that comes as a Nats fan who it's hard enough to watch the World Series this year. But anyway, there was something in the Athletic about MLB guys, owners laying off a lot of people due to decreased revenues. Do you guys know more about that?
Yeah. So today, Rob Manfred gave an interview, talked about, I think they finally have gotten their crap together, because there was a steady trickle of the Athletics are laying people off, the Cubs are laying people off, a lot of teams are laying people off. And so that Athletic story today from Evan Drellick was the upshot of there are hundreds, and they tried to catalog what it is. I think to push back against that this evening, Rob Manfred mentioned that they're like something like $2 to $3 billion in losses this year, and that the teams are going into quote unquote unprecedented debt. The owners are, or something like that. My experience with Major League Baseball news, business news, is that you can't take anything they say at face value. I think, yeah, the trend is correct. I mean, obviously they didn't make the money they expected this year, but whether the $2 to $3 billion in losses and the level of debt that they say that they're going to take, that they're undergoing is accurate, I don't believe it, because Major League Baseball has never been honest about their money. I think the upshot here, though, is teams are going to lose a lot of expertise, both on the business side and on the baseball operations side. Scouts, analysts, people like that are gone. I think what people in baseball are saying is that this is a very short-sighted decision, because you might save several $100,000 in salaries from layoffs, or a few $1 million in salaries from layoffs, but how many multi-million-dollar decisions are now going to get blown because you don't have good scouting, or you don't have good analysis, or you don't have good planning for the future? Again, it's something of unanswerable question, and it's something of a question that Major League Baseball will never really answer and their owners will never really fully answer. But this is an opportunity for a very big bloodletting on the part of Major League Baseball. They are going to cut all kinds of people. They are not going to get their jobs back. They are going to just live with fewer people in the front offices going forward. And that's just the way it's going to be. And it's to the point where the narrative that Major League Baseball and Rob Manfred are going to put forward about how much there are in losses is, I think, going to be pushed forward to the point where they have the chutzpah to ask for some sort of bailout or assistance from Congress within the next year. I would almost bank on it. And when that happens, I am going to just be barfing up bile because these guys are loaded. But I think that's where that's going to go.
And just to add to what Craig said, this is also laying the groundwork for a very odd winter in terms of baseball operations, in terms of teams choosing to improve themselves or not, choosing who to tender contracts to, who to non-tender, whose options get picked up, and so on. I know Craig and I, talking about this offline, have gone back and forth as to just what percentage of options get declined and just who gets non-tendered, meaning that they do not have the opportunity to go to arbitration, but just become free agents in the same way that David Ortiz went from the Twins to the Red Sox 100 years ago. It could be a lot. It could be many, many players and some very surprising names, and teams will keep pleading poverty right from now into the spring, because we don't know if we're going to have a regular season that starts on time next year, and we don't know if it will be safe to have fans. And I probably shouldn't say this, but when I watch the World Series and I do see the fans in the stands, I think selfish assholes. I mean, I'm happy to see the baseball games, but I don't think those people should be there either as at the invitation of Major League Baseball or as consumers. They are potential spreaders, and they're taking a risk just to show that they have the privilege of being there. But in any case, next season might not start on time, or if it does, might not start with fans. And then we get into the period that the current collective bargaining agreement reaches its end, and the owners will feel righteous in their being able to demand the players make concessions because they have suffered so badly due to the pandemic.
Other comments, questions? Yeah,
Justin.
I see Justin. Yes.
Unmute yourself. Oh, we can unmute you.
Okay.
Whoop, my bad. I did it.
We got you. Oh, now we don't hear you.
I did it. It's my bad. There we go.
Okay.
Hey, hello.
Hi.
Hello.
There it
Hey,
is.
all right. I'm curious, as we go into the postseason, as we go into the off season, I love these so very much, but I wonder if we can make these sessions more topical, like have one on like the relevance or irrelevance of the minor leagues and player development,
Come up a number of times.
and then another one on like other pertinent issues, because I find myself with the chat room like, oh my God, there's so many things I want to talk about and we're not going to cover them. So yeah, but the one thought that came to me is like, oh my God, I mean, so many players have come up because just accidentally because of 2020 and have had success. And that's going to be a reason for them to say, oh, we don't need so many minor league teams. So I'm also just confused personally about do we have a new paradigm for player development? And like maybe some minor leagues are irrelevant, but I don't want the minor leagues to go away. And I find that fascinating.
Can I respond to that? Justin, first of all, with regards to topic, I think it's a great idea. And we tried to do that this time by really talking about the election, which is admittedly not a specifically baseball issue, but it was timely. But I think it's a good idea. I would ask everyone on this call that you've stayed on this long means you must be either a masochist of some kind or you're enjoying it. If the latter, please make an effort to talk it up among people. I mean, we just want to, it doesn't cost anything, but there's work associated with putting these together. We think we have a pretty good, fun, kind of unusual product, and it would be great to spread it to more people. So, let people know. I'll send out a link to the YouTube for the video. Feel free to share that. And if we, move on to a special topic on, the future of player development or whatever it might be, please spread the word. That would really be helpful for all of us. I think that your last question, Major League Baseball is a business, obviously, but it's also a construct, right? It relies on a lot of people believing things that aren't really true, right? For example, and this is, I don't think I'd ever say this, but this isn't really like that. This is important, right? It is important in some existential sense, but whether the Rays beat the Dodgers or the Dodgers beat the Rays in this thing, it means a lot to a lot of people, but it's a kind of a removed from reality abstract, right? Whether the Yankees trade Gary Sanchez or not is important to Gary Sanchez, but so that this is a construct. Baseball itself, the actual game, if you played it as a kid or even as an older person, is an extraordinarily fun thing to do. And that is the core, but that's a strange thing to be at the core of a multi-billion-dollar business. And the reason I say that is not to just confuse everybody, although I realize I may have had that effect, but because I think everything is up in the air in a post-COVID world, right? I have to say, I don't think Aaron Boone is particularly one of the 300 best people in America to be managing a team in the postseason. That's just one man's opinion. And I was struck by the way a few days after the defeat to the Rays, it's in New York, and there's a headline, I forget which Steinbrenner, says, Aaron Boone will be back. Will Boone be back? That's the final word. In this very Steinbrenner-esque, which means Trumpian imperial tone. And what struck me about that is my first reaction was, pardon my French, fuck you, Even if I like Aaron Boone, fuck you. It's not like who are you, again, as Steinbrenner, which is this particularly pathological family, lecturing the people of New York, many of whom have cared a lot longer about the Yankees than a lot longer than the Steinbrenner family has, about we're doing this, end of discussion. And that tone just falls differently than it did even back in 2002 when the Yankees, lost to the Angels in the LCS or whatever it was, and everyone got upset, right? And I just wonder how much of this lasts in the new America, right? In the America where 3 months from now, by February 1st, I think we'll have a real sense whether we are living in one of three countries, right? A country, some people call it civil war. That's not a term I like to use, but with widespread social unrest, sufficient that it is that many people's daily lives are disrupted. There's a non-zero chance that will happen. And for my second one, I guess I chose this finger appropriately. Trump being reelected and us moving towards a consolidating semi-authoritarian regime, right? Baseball surviving in that country is very different. And the third one, not baseball again, Biden winning, the ball's still up in the air. And Americans thinking about what the new small d democratic America looks like. I think in either one of those, baseball has to navigate a new place for itself. And I really hope it's not people like the Steinbrenners or the Ricketts. And it's, and I'm just picking the highest profile. It's as the social critic Greg Proops has said, these teams are all run by rich white conservative men. There may be one or two exceptions, but only one or two. Imposing, taking control of what is a national treasure, small b baseball, and telling us we're doing it on their terms. I don't know if that's so sustainable.
One of my two closest friends, somebody I grew up with, became a Yankees executive and was for the better part of 7 years. George Steinbrenner was an executive at that time. And George, and this is an example of his privilege and his personality, never bothered to learn the phone extensions at the Yankees. So he would just dial random numbers in the stadium and then ask to be transferred to his party. So my friend would, on a typical day, be sitting in his office and the phone would go brip, brip, and he'd pick it up. Yes, hello. And he would hear in George's voice, who the fuck is this? And you'd say, this is Andy, sir. And he said, well, transfer me to Lontrose. And then he would sweat buckets hoping that he did not transfer George into oblivion, which he did on occasion. I just wanted to contradict Lincoln in this one small sense, that the juxtaposition that we have done here of baseball and the election is very much on target, and the election is very much an issue for baseball, as it is going to as is the movies, as is theater, as is concerts, as is everything else. We had a president who got a warning of an attack on this country, not by soldiers, by germs, not Germans, right? And it was going to be potentially more devastating than anything that happened to Pearl Harbor. And very cavalierly, he blew that off and wish casted that, as he had said a million times and is saying right to the present day, it's going to go away. We've turned the corner. It's all better. And I was thinking about this earlier today. We all sort of have this idea that like somewhere about New Year's Eve, there's going to be a vaccine proclaimed. And next year will be better, and we'll all be going to restaurants again and all be doing the kind of thing, hugging our parents, right, that we haven't been able to do. But that's not how vaccines work. And to the extent that it's like not a vaccine that automatically gives you 100% immunity, but is more like, your typical seasonal flu vaccine, where it gives you, a 75% chance that you're not going to get it, or an 80% chance. These issues, because we were so, not we, he was so sloppy about this, are not going away anytime soon. The masks are not going away anytime soon. And as this theoretical vaccine gets distributed and the population does gain immunity, then the transmission rate will go down, but not right away, and you won't be bulletproof. And so people will have to make decisions about how they associate and what they do, just like they're doing now, going well into the future. And this affects both baseball as a business from the supplier side, and for us, baseball from the consumer side. So I just want to say it is very, very apt because it impinges on that so strongly.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I jokingly said we waste our time talking baseball, but you're right. I mean, the like all industries, the outcome of this election is going to affect Major League Baseball. And and I've said this before. I do think that the union, the Play Association, I don't know who those people are other than their names, but I can't help but think that as these transformations continue with labor and the changing of moving away from minor leagues, they're gonna and with free agency not existing the way it has in the past, you'd think they'd be a little more woke, at least vis-a-vis management. I don't see evidence of that yet. Maybe there is, but they're gonna have to be.
We have a new collective bargaining agreement. The current collective bargaining agreement ends at the end of the 2021 season in December, from a year from now. And before the pandemic and before everything that had to be negotiated this year to make this season happen, and I talk to these people sometimes. I have sources there and a couple of friends there, and I probably carry their water more than I don't, but whatever. I'm pretty objective about them too. Their view, I think, was we're just going to ride this out until 2021. Everything that we've been wanting to do for the last 3 cycles when we've gotten our butts kicked at the collective bargaining table is going to now be reopened, and we're going to deal with it in the 2021 process. Well, that got tested this year because of all the new negotiation that had to happen, and they got one good data point out of it, which was that they got some solidarity on a few issues that they hadn't had for a long time. So I think they realized that they can stand up to Rob Manfred and the owners a little bit and maybe get their way on a few things. But I think they're still punting most everything. They're hoping to get through this off season, this season, which they have. We're 1 or 2 days away from them having accomplished that. They're hoping the season starts as normal next year. They're hoping the off season goes as normal. It won't. And that they're hoping that they can then sit down and fight for what they want next year. In some ways, I view the union right now as being very well-meaning, but also being very much like Democrats trying to fight Trump over the last 4 years. They think that the rules are still the rules. They think that they can go sit down at a table in good faith with Rob Manfred and the owners and get something that they want and change the system back to the way they want it. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they'll get a few concessions like they normally do. They'll give up a few things that they don't realize are as big as they are, like they normally do. And in a lot of ways, things aren't going to be fundamentally better. They're not going to remake how free agency works. They're not going to remake how the road to arbitration works. They're not going to salvage anything out of the minor leagues that all of us on this call might want salvage, because in a lot of ways, they still view them as their bargaining chips. Amateurs are still going to be boned in ways that they weren't boned 10 years ago, but are now. So they think that they're going to raise hell in the collective bargaining next year. I don't think they are. That's where the woke minor league, that's where the woke union is right now, is kind of diluted in my view.
I'm just going to push back for 1 second because I'm going to be something very unpopular, but I think there's some truth to it. In the last 4 years, the Democratic Party has stopped almost any major Trump administration, when it had a majority in both houses, passed one major piece of legislation. The Democratic Party has beaten the Republicans in almost every election since Trump came in office. They've impeached the president, which drove his numbers down when he was losing by about 6 points before COVID broke. And they put enough pressure on at the local level that the state elected officials aren't going along with Donald Trump's efforts to steal the election. I could go on, right? I think that it is sometimes unhelpful. I mean, I know that on the left, and my left credentials, are pretty damn good. We make ourselves feel good by attacking the Democratic Party, but we are at a moment, and they have a platform now that makes any platform, Democratic Party platform since McGovern, look like Reagan. So the Democrats, and they've kept Donald Trump, has almost never broken more than 45% in approval ratings. Empirically speaking, the Democrats have done an extraordinary job, to the extent there is the Democrats, and maybe that's one person, right? But they've done an extraordinary job holding their caucus together, even with somebody like Chuck Schumer, who's neither a progressive nor particularly gifted in this situation. They've done a fantastic job from the leadership level to the grassroots, which has put the pressure on these people. So I really think that we have to recognize Democrats are not a socialist party. They're not a radical party. They're a centrist, center-left party with huge ties to the financial establishments, but they've not rolled over here. That's just bad. That's just, analysis is wrong, but it's a dangerous one because it feeds a narrative that is unhealthy. Sorry to go off on that, and I do agree with Gary's point. We would love to have Marvin Miller back.
One could wish. Other thoughts, comments? We're approaching 9 o'clock. I don't know if I see hands. I'm trying to look for hands.
Wrap up here.
Okay, closing thoughts?
Thank you, everybody, again. This has been, we really appreciate you coming. This has been great talking baseball and politics. And Craig's now angry at me, so he's putting the Dodgers cap back on.
I'm not angry at you. I'm just trying to get at you.
But in all seriousness, please try to spread the word, because it does, even though, like I said, there's no real financial cost associated with this for us. But there is some organizing. We put time into making the flyers, and we try to dig out interesting photos. And we just want to share what we think is a great, fun seminar with as many people as possible. So please spread the word. You'll all be getting an email with the link to the YouTube video. Will be a long video. Share that, watch that. And we hope to see you. We're not calling it the Thanksgiving special, but bring your leftovers.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
I agree. Thank you so much for joining us, and until next time.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Go Dodgers.
Interesting. Thanks.
Don't forget to vote.
Yes, please.
Oh, shit, vote. Yeah, okay.
I already voted.
I did too, in Ohio, so my vote might count, maybe.
I vote in New York, so it doesn't matter. Bye.
Oh.
I vote in DC, and it truly doesn't matter.
Yeah, I vote in Maryland. Same thing. Doesn't matter.
Democracy's on me. See you guys.
See ya. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.